Hey, what's up guys? It's been a long time since I've done a vlog, so I thought this would be a good opportunity, given all that's going on in the world today, to sit down and go over the camera that we've had pretty much as our A camera for the last year and a half now, which is the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K. Let's dive into that camera and how it's working out for us a year after we bought it.
Talking a little bit about, I think Mothman has kind of moved into the area of focal.
We bought the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera 4K early last year. We did it for a number of reasons. One is that we're a big fan of Blackmagic going back to 2018 when we first rented the Blackmagic Ursa Mini for a shoot. And that camera, the Ursa Mini, sort of became our go-to camera. But we were really excited about the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema because of the fact that it really competed with the Ursa Mini, but in a much smaller form factor. We were really anxious to get a smaller camera out in the field that we felt could handle some of the challenges of an STM shoot.
Just a mini. In the last 4 years of my research I've been doing since I was told that the Beast of Bray Road lived on my property, I started putting
A year since we bought the camera, I want to go through some of the pros and cons relating directly to the camera and what we think of it now that we've been using it for that long. Oh no! I instantly kicked the tripod. The first really big pro for me is the interface and the menu system. In 2017, we rented the digital Bolex D16, and the thing that really stood out to us about that camera was how simple to use the menu system was. Up to that point, we had solely been using Sony. And of course, Sony has some of the most convoluted menus in cameras today. And to have a camera where we could take it into the field, hit 1 or 2 buttons and be shooting was really exciting for us. You can adjust your ISO, your frame rate, all of that with just 1 or 2 clicks. And that's a big step up from something like Sony, where you had to click through this very convoluted menu system unless you hotkey those buttons on the camera to have those specific settings. This is just a really easy to use camera, and when it comes to the sort of run and gun setup that we're constantly using with STM shoots, that's one of the reasons this has become such a big win for us. The picture quality of the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K is unmatched in terms of what you're getting for what you're paying. So we're able to shoot in RAW if we need to. We're able to shoot in ProRes 422 HQ, LT, Proxy. You've got all these different settings. You can shoot in 1080, 4K, 2K, any number of settings that are very easy to access and use. The picture quality is astounding, and it's all for about $1,200. And that's one of the reasons we ended up buying 2 of these cameras. Rather than continue renting Ursa Mini or an FS7, we decided we were just gonna go ahead and stock up on Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4Ks, and then if we need a 3rd camera, we'll rent one. But we really love how amazing the picture quality is for this camera for what you're paying for it.
But the Mothman Frenzy went from 1966 into 1967.
The Micro Four Thirds lens system was something I'd never really played around with until we got these cameras, and I had heard so many negative things about shooting with that particular setup. How narrow the field of view is compared to other cameras, how insanely tiny the lenses are. And I have to say, both of those things that most people put out there as being cons, I ended up really responding to and loving about the camera. So we really like that narrow field of view, especially for projects like the upcoming Mothman Legacy, which is a direct sequel to the Mothman at Point Pleasant, which we shot on the digital Bolex D16, which had that really narrow field of view. So we, so far, have really loved filming in that sort of like sub Super 35 sensor view that you get with this camera. For some people, I can understand it won't be for them, but there's something about it that really feels cinematic to me, and the form factor of the actual lenses is fantastic for us. it just cuts down on the amount of storage room we have to use, and we can take 4 or 5 lenses instead of 1 or 2.
Scratch Zach's back.
Here, I'm here for you.
Thank you.
You get it real good though.
Come on, man. Don't be a. Just scratch it. Don't. You're rubbing it real nice.
The monitor on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema is beautiful. The picture quality is astounding. It's very clear, it's bright, the colors pop, they look exactly how they should relating to the image coming out of the camera. There is a big negative to this monitor that I want to talk about in a minute, but I will say that you can save, as an indie filmmaker, you can save yourself a lot of money by buying this camera and simply going off of the monitor that's built onto the camera.
Just a little spritz of Fox.
There are some cons to this camera, and there are cons that I'm not even going to mention in this video that we've picked up on with a year of using it pretty consistently. The biggest con for us has been the low light capability. When this came out, I had heard that the low light in the Blackmagic Pocket was really solid, and I have to say we've seen that. We have seen the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema have a really decent low light image. However, for the most part, the camera creates its own noise, which is very bizarre. Even in a lower lit studio setting, we've seen the camera create this sort of gross digital noise. And it's one of the unfortunate things about the camera, and something that keeps us consistently going back to the Sony a7S II, which I'm actually filming this on right now. With the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, we could be shooting at like 100 and have something lit fairly well, and it will still create this sort of like purple noise. So that's one huge downside to this camera, probably the biggest downside to the camera for me and for the workflow we use. One of the downsides to the monitor is the fact that you cannot flip this or pull it out from the camera in any way. It just is locked in place on the camera. It drives me nuts. It's such a shame because the monitor itself is so solid and gets such a good image, and you can't do anything with it. You can in no way adjust that monitor. So that's a huge downside to the monitor, and something that has consistently been coming up as an issue with shoots. The slow motion on the Blackmagic is fantastic. We've loved shooting at 120 on this. We've shot on 60. The best thing about it is when you play it back, you can see it in that frame rate, you know, in the project settings. You can actually see it in slow motion. But the windowed sensor is a huge downside when you're filming in ProRes. I hate the fact that when I'm filming in ProRes, shooting at 120, the field of view gets cropped way down. It just creates this headache that we've had to deal with so far with almost every camera that we've used that shoots at 120. As great as the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K is, I wish you could shoot at 120 in ProRes at 4K and not have to crop the window. That would send the camera over the edge for us.
I'm gonna follow you, Zach.
Going this way.
I'm following you.
So one thing I should say is that you can record all your video directly to an SSD. That's been a game changer for us, honestly. We're able to record at 4K in 120 frames, whatever, for hours and not have to swap out if we're recording to one of those 2 terabyte SSDs. But the downside is that we've also started finding these quirks more recently where the camera is shutting itself off every couple minutes. And I've been able to find nothing online where other people are having this issue, so maybe it's just us. But one of our 2 Blackmagic Pockets has decided that anytime we're recording, regardless of the media we're recording to and the resolution we're recording in, it's going to shut itself off every 2 minutes. And we've also noticed that in other settings with the other camera as well. So both cameras have given us some issues with recording, and we're not able to figure out if it's something we're doing or if it's the camera itself. So just keep that in mind.
Where's John at?
Finally, the biggest con, one of the biggest cons to this camera is the battery life. A camera this great, where you can only pull 30 minutes of battery life out of it, is super unfortunate. We've had to resort to different power grips and external battery sources just so we can try to keep the cameras going for longer. And that's been great. We've at least been able to find another way to get something extra out of the Blackmagic. But having to bulk out our camera with a power grip or some sort of external battery source has been a huge downside to the Blackmagic for us. And finally, the camera itself is great. I can't recommend it highly enough, especially if you're an indie filmmaker who does a lot of run and gun work, who can handle lighting and knows what they're doing. There are a lot of quirks with this camera you have to learn how to work around, but I think with time, you'll figure it out and be able to make it work for you. One big thing about this camera is it's not a replacement for every camera out there. Basically, what we use the Blackmagics for are cinematic, narrative, or cinematic documentary work. If you're doing a more traditional run and gun style documentary where you're taking a camera in the field and just shooting on the fly, you're gonna want something like a Sony a7 III or a Sony a7S II, because the Blackmagic takes a lot of work, and especially when it comes to that lighting. Your style of filmmaking might depend on whether or not this is the camera for you. Thanks for watching. I don't know how many vlogs I'm gonna be doing. I just wanted to do this and talk about the camera since we've been using it for a while, but I hope everyone's staying safe. You can subscribe to this channel even though I barely update it. Yeah, see ya.